Alright, hello chess fans. It's November 8th, 2022. This is Sean from the E5 Outpost. I've noticed that there aren't a lot of video recaps discussing general chess news, so I've decided to go ahead and start a segment sort of discussing what's happening around the chess world, notable games that have been played recently, a little bit of chess history. The format is going to be basically on Mondays, I recap everything that's happened over the weekend, if there's been any major news. And then, of course, during the weekdays, I recap what's been happening the day prior. So just a few stories, a 10 to 15 minute segment, something that you can watch or listen to on a quick break, something you can throw on just to catch up with what's been going on. Nothing really in-depth here analysis-wise, just a big overview of everything that's been happening. Typically, I'll try to have 3 stories prepared just to have a little bit of variety for viewers. So, just to give you a brief overview of what I've got today, we're going to go over 3 stories that happened over the weekend and that happened yesterday. The first of which is that this past weekend, Women's Candidates Pool A has concluded. Late Tingjie defeated Muzychuk and will advance to the Candidates Finals, where she'll face off against the winner of Pool B, which will be decided, which will begin at the end of this month and will be decided sometime in December. The winner of the Candidates Finals will challenge Ju Win-jun sometime next year for the title of Women's Chess Champion. So that'll be the first story. Next, we'll talk about the Chess.com Global Championship Finals, which just concluded yesterday. Wesley defeated Nihal Sarin in their match, winning 4.5 games to 1.5, which of course made Wesley the winner of this event. So we'll go ahead and take a look at one of those games later. And finally, the third story will cover the 2022 iteration of the World Rapid and Blitz event. FIDE has just announced that the event will take place in Almaty, Kazakhstan, and that the event will be held from December 25th to December 30th. So we'll take that time to talk a little bit about what last year's World Rapid and Blitz tournament looked like, to give us sort of a refresher of what these events were like. So the first game that we'll go ahead and look at today is the game between Lei Tingjie and Muzychuk. This was the final game in the classical portion of their match. If they tied this one, because they had drawn all 3 previous games as well, they would move on to the rapid portion of the match. And if they also drew all the rapid portion games, they'd move on to an Armageddon game. Obviously, because this game was decisive, they did not need to move on to the rapid portion to find a victor. So, just to go through this game pretty quickly, this was a Grunfeld. One of the major themes of this game, Muzychuk decided to trade her light squared bishop for this knight on move 15, and it wasn't really clear if this was sort of like the best strategic decision for black. Later in the game, this bishop is sort of unopposed. This knight sort of doesn't do a great job of fighting against this bishop, as we'll see. This becomes a major theme of the game as well. So this bishop is putting pressure on the e7 pawn, and at this point Muzychuk really needed to find if she wanted to find a more active defense, she needed to actually jettison this pawn and play something like queen f4. The idea is that after something like bishop takes e7, bishop e5, okay, maybe white's threatening this, but this is a more important threat. Black is threatening right here. And so even after something like rook fd1, queen h2 check, this position is just a lot messier, and practically there are sort of chances for either side to get counterplay and to get activity, and to sort of either side can win in this position. However, instead, in this position, Muzychuk decided to drop her queen back, play queen c7, which basically just defended e7. It was a passive move. Maybe at this point she figured that she wanted to make a draw here and try to win in the rapid portion instead. Unfortunately, that ended up working out for her. White continued to put pressure on e7, so rook a e1 anticipates this e-file opening up, which did happen. So now white has 2 pieces aiming at e7. Later, we see that white brought another piece onto this file. So now there's 3 pieces that are sort of eyeing e7, this is already very, very difficult for white to defend. This is actually, and so g4 is an interesting move. This actually illustrates why black trading off the light squared bishop so early may not have been such a good idea. The idea behind g4 is that after h takes, bishop takes, this bishop is going to take one of these rooks next turn. The reason why something like this happened in the game is that, again, like black had traded off the light squared bishop, so there's kind of nobody on white in black's camp to fight against this guy. This knight is supposed to fight against this bishop, but it's not doing anything. Like it can't go here. You don't want to send it here. Obviously, it's not going here. It's not going here. It's not going here. So the knight's no good. The bishop is so much better in this position, which is why it was maybe a strategic mistake for Muzychuk to have given up her light square bishop so early. So play continued. Black basically, there's no chance for black to get any counterplay on the king side. Like, you don't have any pawn breaks anymore. And now, right, there's so much pressure on e7. Like, it's just going to fall in the very, very near future. Black basically gave up on this pawn and said, all right, I'm going to try to get this guy active. They traded, like, everything. And so at this point, white was already in a good position. White had an extra pawn, a protected passed pawn, which had nothing to oppose it to go down the d file. White also was threatening b7. White also had this bishop that could come over here. White had the better active piece, or the better minor piece. The position's already very, very, very difficult for Muzychuk to play. And then here, Lei Tingjie played an interesting little tactic. Rook takes f7, followed by bishop takes c8, winning another pawn. Right, and so already, right, this pawn is, how are you going to capture this pawn as black? And then Lei Tingjie found a way to bring the king into the position. The nice thing about f4 is that after g takes f4, this g pawn is also a protected passer. So later, white can also think about how to queen this pawn, maybe jettison this pawn instead. But right, with g takes f4, obviously now white can march the king up, capture on f4, and in this position, Anna Muzychuk resigned, and so Pool A, right, concluded with this game. This was the decisive game. Lei Tingjie advances to the next round, and Pool A also featured players Maria Muzychuk and Humpi Koneru. What was interesting is that it featured both Ukrainian candidates and none of the Russian candidates. I'm pretty sure that was not a coincidence on FIDE's part. Pool B begins about 3 weeks later on November 28th, and it features Alexandra Kostenyuk, Alexandra Goryachkina, Katerina Lagno, and Tan Zhongyi. So also featuring all three Russian candidates and none of the Ukrainian candidates. Again, probably not a coincidence. So the winner of Pool B, which will be determined probably sometime at the beginning to the middle of December, will face Lei Tingjie, who was the winner of Pool A, for the right to challenge Ju Wenjun for the women's championship title sometime next year. So the next thing that we're going to go over is the round one between Wesley So and Nihal Sarin at the Chess.com Global Championship Finals. Wesley, of course, had defeated Nihal 4.5 to 1.5 yesterday. The day before, they had stopped at 3-1 already. So Wesley already had a comfortable lead going into the final day. It was pretty lopsided. Game 3, it's an interesting one if you have the chance to look at it. Went a bit out of control. It looked like Nihal could have won, but was not so decisive in securing an attack on Wesley's queen side. But we're going to go ahead and look at Game 1, which I thought set the tone for a match and which had a pretty nice finish. So the game was a Petrov. Wesley had a solid advantage out of the opening and sort of just nursed this advantage for the rest of the game. So as you can see, pretty solid space advantage. White was induced to play f6, so that's annoying. This bishop has a hard time getting out. This knight maybe would have liked to have come to f6, but it's not going there anymore. Right, so already sort of an uncomfortable position. White was able, because of the space advantage, to double rooks on the e-file. Black kind of, these pieces, it's hard for black to sort of coordinate down the e-file and contest. White then pushed pawns on both sides of the board. This is actually a nice position. In this position, Nihal played a6. What's funny is that black can't actually take queen takes a5 here. There's this great tactic, c5. And the idea is that this there's no way for black to defend both this knight and this knight. Obviously, in this position, c5 won't work because the queen is defending this knight here. So Wesley was sort of playing on both sides of the board, and then with knight h4 sort of committed to a kingside attack, Nihal tried to get counterplay on the queen side. Here, Wesley had to be actually quite decisive. Knight f5 is an only move here. Wesley will have to respond to knight takes c5 here. Obviously can't capture with the pawn because it's pinned. Wesley has to play a move like queen f3 here to continue pressing this kingside attack. The game actually ended quite beautifully. Knight g6, great knight sacrifice. The point is that now it's very, very hard for black to escape checkmate. Black tried and resigned when it was mate in 3. What I found interesting about this position, actually, this felt very similar. I played through this game and then I saw this position, and then later that night I got a copy of Bobby Fischer's 60 Memorable Games, played through the first one. And what's funny is that this position, the position here in the Wesley So Nihal Sarin game, looks very similar to an analysis line that Fischer offers in his game against James Sherwin. So this is a position that the Wesley So game reminded me of. Here, Sherwin plays knight f6. Actually, though, as an analysis line, Fischer offers if black played 17h6, he was going to reply h5, and if h takes, and if black plays f6, which is a blunder, white has queen e2, with the idea of playing queen h5, queen h7. So very similar checkmating idea to this idea that unfolded in the Wesley So game. Right. So that was just an interesting sort of parallel with a classic. So with this game, Wesley So ended up winning the first Chess.com Global Championship that was open to all. I think it was open to all titled players, all verified players, and so congratulations to Wesley So. All right, and so the final game that we're going to go ahead and look at is from last year's World Rapid in Blitz. This is going to be Abdusattorov versus Magnus. So just to recap, the dates and the venue for this year have been announced. It's going to be in Almaty, Kazakhstan, from December 25th to December 20th. That's going to be this year's World Rapid in Blitz. Last year, for the Open Rapid section, Nodirbek Abdusattorov famously defeated a number of people who we recognize. Fabiano Caruana, Levon Aronian, Radoslav Tingjie, Boris Gelfand, and of course Magnus himself en route to winning the Open section. Alexandria Kostenyuk was the winner for the Women's Rapid section, which for her was redemption for 2014 when she tied with Katerina Lagno, but Lagno actually finished ahead of Kostenyuk in tiebreaks. For the Blitz section last year, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave secured the championship for the Open section, while for the women's section, Bibisara Asabayeva finished a clear point and a half ahead of the field to take the crown. So again, this is going to be just a quick overview of the Abdusattorov versus Magnus game. What's interesting about this game is that Magnus is actually strategically winning for a lot of this game. We see that early Magnus made a decision to allow one bishop to be exchanged and then to exchange the other bishop. The idea is that Magnus thinks this is going to be a very closed sort of game, so knights will be better in this position. And it turns out that the game is actually very close. It's very hard for white to find any sort of good pawn breaks. Meanwhile, there are a number of squares that look good for black's knight to land on eventually. And actually, the game, so rooks get exchanged as well. And this game actually looks very similar, like, to the types of endgame that Magnus typically wins. This is, like a Fischer endgame. Fischer also gets these endgames a lot and wins a lot of these. This is just, like, such a better minor piece. And this piece this is sort of this piece's primary target, but it's really hard. Like, how is this piece going to get over there? Not really clear. But it's possible because of the quick time control that Magnus has a difficult time figuring out how to convert this advantage safely, and the position actually starts to become more and more open, and by the time the last set of minor pieces gets traded off, this position is actually it's technically a table-based draw, but it's just very, very difficult, practically speaking, for black to hold this. This pawn is already so far advanced, this queen is so active, and this king is so out in the open and vulnerable. Basically, Magnus has to do a lot of calculation and make sure he can either continue giving perpetual check to this king, or that he can put his queen on h8 and not get checkmated. Either of which is just a difficult plan to put into action. So the endgame itself, is very complicated. Both players actually missed a few chances. One of the little areas that I wanted to focus on was actually here. It's kind of interesting. I tried to piece together what the table bases were saying, because apparently queen d1 check is the winning move for Nodirbek in this position. I think, from what I was able to piece together, I think the idea is that white wants to put black's king on a dark square, because eventually white wants to deliver a cross check to black's king. So here's a sample line that I came up with. Right, and so black's queen, obviously white's queen is defending the h8 square. Black's queen needs to basically just give perpetual check in order to draw. These are sort of the best checks that black can come up with. And at some point, black is going to run out of checks. In this position is sort of what white is aiming for, I think, where black is kind of giving the last check that black is able to give. White gives a cross check, right? Defending against this check while simultaneously hitting this king and obviously counterattacking this queen. And obviously this endgame is very easy for white to win, right? So that's sort of what white is aiming for. But you can see, like, sort of by the complexity of this line, and if you look into the endgame yourself, the complexity of a number of lines that pop up, this is very, very much not an easy endgame to win or to hold, depending on which side you are. Eventually, Magnus finds himself in a position where he's unable to give any additional checks. He actually blunders in this position. I think. Where is the blunder? I think the blunder is it's either he doesn't play king b4 here, or he plays king a2 and he needs to play king a4 here. It's already a difficult position, but the idea is that once he's forced to move his king into the corner here, white has a queen d4 check, forking the king and the queen. And it was in this position that Magnus resigned. Obviously, as I said, Nodirbek went on to win this tournament, and this year is hoping to defend his title as the World Rapid Champion. All right, so that's your chess coverage for today. We'll be back with more news and analysis tomorrow. This is Sean from the E5 Outpost. See you later, Chess World.